January 19th, 2016, our first meeting of the year to order. Could you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I please have a roll call?
Commissioner Harper Pedersen.
Present.
Commissioner Marsters.
Present.
Commissioner Silberman is likely to be out this evening, though there is a chance he could attend. So I wanted to inform the commission of that. Vice Chair Bergman.
Present.
And Chair Gutierrez.
Present. Public comment. Public comment is limited to items not on the agenda. The commission may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed by the Brown Act. However, the commission's general policy is to refer to items to staff for attention or have a matter placed on a future commission's agenda for a more comprehensive action or report. Is there anybody that wanted to speak on any items that are not on the agenda? Okay. Moving along to public hearing, I did want to make a change in order. I'd like to move item D under reports, correspondence, and general information to after item B, so before B and C. Does anybody have any opposition to that? Can I get a motion for that change?
So moved.
Second.
Do I need a roll call vote on that? I know we're doing the roll call vote again, but, okay.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen.
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters.
Yes.
Commissioner Silberman is absent. Vice Chair Bergman.
Yes.
And Chair Gutierrez.
Yes. Procedure for public hearing. Staff will present a report on the history, physical features, et cetera, on the application, followed with the staff's recommendation. The applicant will make a presentation. Thereafter, interested members of the community may speak on the proposal. When all interested parties have had an opportunity to be heard, the hearing will be closed and no further discussion from the floor can be held. The commission will then consider the evidence and make its recommendation. If you challenge a public hearing item in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing described in this notice, the public notice, or in a written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. Speakers should fill out a speaker's form found by the door and hand it to the recording secretary prior to addressing the commission. The speaker should come up to the microphone to speak since the meeting is being recorded. This will assist staff in preparing minutes. Our first item, 219 Oak County Road, Unit B, APN 046-040-030, consideration of a request for conditional use permit, approval to sell used vehicles. Andrea.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good evening, Commission. My name is Andrea Martisich, and I'll be presenting this item this evening. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to add used vehicle sales to an existing smog and auto repair business at 219 Old County Road. The project site is approximately 30,000 square feet, with a complex comprised exclusively of auto uses. There are 12 parking spaces for this business, 5 inside the tenant space and 7 outside. The property is located in the IL, Light Industrial Zoning District, and has a general planned land use designation of planned industrial. Surrounding the property are uses such as contract services, auto body and repair, and kennels. The applicant proposes to continue his existing smog check and auto repair business, but supplement it with used vehicle sales. There's an office space which will be utilized for the sales, and 1 interior parking space which will be used for auto sales display parking. Business hours will be Monday through Friday from 9:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. A complete analysis of the parking is within the staff report, and this existing parking is non-conforming. However, the new use will not trigger any additional parking requirements, and therefore approval of this use would not require the addition of any parking spaces on site. All used vehicle sales will occur within the enclosed building, and no exterior changes are proposed. A typical day for the auto repair portion of the business includes 1 to 3 cars, 3 at the most. The addition of the auto sales to this space should not generate a significant amount of additional traffic, since the applicant anticipates 1 to 2 sales per month. None of the reviewing departments had any conditions of approval or comments to add, and staff has not received any public comment with regards to this application. These are the required findings, which are also outlined in the staff report. The proposal does meet all the findings, namely the proposed use is consistent with the zoning code requirements with inclusion of the proposed conditions as shown in the conditional use permit. Should any negative impacts or significant changes be proposed in the future, the Planning Commission could re-review the proposal. The project is consistent with the general plan and is suitable for the site as the tenant space is located within a multi-tenant building which contains all auto repair uses. The site access already exists and the addition of auto sales will not require any additional utilities or services. This is the motion you would make should you choose to approve this item. I'm available for questions and I believe the business owner is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for staff right now? I don't have any speaker cards for this item. Is there anybody that'd like to speak on this matter?
I just have a couple quick questions. Any concerns received from the public since we received the report?
No, nothing.
Okay. And then I guess what happens if the vehicle sales exceed the 1 to 2 per month? Does something get triggered? Does a new review get triggered? How does that process work?
Let me get to the conditions.
And I would also just like to add, I believe the applicant only has a space to have one car at a time within the building. There's an additional area within the floor plan that he's proposing to use for the one car required indoor area location.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so there, and he can't reduce the number of bays, exactly.
Got it.
So-
That brings up the question that I have, which is he only going to be selling one car at a time? Are there going to be cars located outside in the parking spots? You know, and if so is he only going to be displaying one car at a time? And my concern is that this not impact on-street parking on Old County Road. So can we get the applicant to answer those questions?
Good evening.
Evening.
Yes, I'm going to be selling like 1 or 2 cars per month, and there'll be no parking on the street. There's going to be 1 or 2 car parking in the site.
Inside.
Yeah, inside.
But will you have other vehicles that you're trying to sell? And if so, where are they going to be? So are you just going to be selling the cars that are inside, or are you going to have other cars for sale also?
Going to be 1 car at a time, one
Okay.
inside.
Okay, so there won't be any other vehicles that you're trying to sell in the parking lot or anything?
Right.
Okay.
And through the chair and for the information for the commission, our code does require that auto sales be conducted entirely within an enclosed building. So there cannot be any vehicles for sale in the outdoor parking areas.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything further?
Those are my questions. Thanks.
Mine too. So I move that the Planning Commission approve the request of Lee Nying of Smog Express for a conditional use permit to sell used vehicles at 219 Old County Road, Unit B, APN 046040030, based on the required findings and for the reasons incorporated in the staff report.
Second.
Can I get a roll call vote?
Commissioner Harper Pedersen,
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters,
Yes.
Commissioner Silberman is absent, Vice Chair Bergman,
Yes.
Chair Gutierrez.
Yes. All right, moving along. Item B, San Carlos Multimodal Transit Center Project. Consideration of the design review application submitted by San Mateo County Transit, or SamTrans, to build a new transit center and commuter parking on an approximately 4.26 acre site. The site is located within the railroad corridor, generally bounded by El Camino to the west and Caltrain tracks to the east, extending from mid-block between San Carlos Avenue and Cherry Street on the north and almost to Arroyo Avenue on the south. just in case everybody needed a very detailed explanation of what we're talking about here. Colette, Happy New Year.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Colette Meunier. I'm a contract planner assisting the city with processing this development application. This project is part of a planned development that was approved by the City Council in 2013. It included 3 components: the mixed-use village, which includes 202 apartments in 6 buildings, 2 commercial buildings, and a new plaza in front of the historic depot. It includes the new multimodal transit center, which is relocated to the south of the existing center, and within the South Rail corridor, it also provided conditions for temporary uses and for the provision of streetscape. I have here slides from the plan development approval, and I'd like to draw your attention to the northerly end of this. You'll see that the parking is provided as 90-degree, and that also there are 6 parking spaces located in the curve of the driveway return. This area has been reworked. It includes now a bus layover and queuing area on the east side of the parking lot, adjacent to the bank going up to the Caltrain's tracks. The parking spaces have been angled to reinforce the direction of travel. The area where 6 parking spaces were located just to the north of the driveway, that has been converted to an area that will be landscaped. We'll take some of the site drainage, and also for the installation of a monument sign, which is included in your packet. All of the accessible parking spaces are also moved to this area. There are 7, and that has reduced the amount of parking in this area. The parking originally shown here was 43, and it will now be 24. That is made up by the fact that where the accessible parking spaces were provided to the south of Cherry, an increased number of parking spaces will be provided. And also at the south end of the overall project site, there was a multi-use area which has now accommodated an increase in parking. So it changes from 226 spaces, which is what we saw in the planned development, to 256 parking spaces. So this is the north end with the plaza, the middle part, and at this green dotted area at the south end is the area that has been reconfigured in the design review to accommodate more parking. I'm not going to provide a presentation about the current proposal because Samtrans has one, and they will go through it in details. The transit center includes that end of the parking lot, which provides area for kiss and ride, buses and shuttles, car share, taxis. Includes bus shelters, the 256 parking spaces, transit center identification sign, landscape along El Camino Real, landscaping throughout the transit center, and improvements to El Camino Real, including improved pedestrian crossings. As I reviewed earlier, these are the changes that have occurred in the area north of Cherry Street. And it's important that we talk here a little bit about what is the purview of the city and the Planning Commission. Projects by other public agencies are not normally subject to city review. Design review is required as a condition of the plan development approval, and it focuses on compliance with the plan development conditions and the look and feel of the transit center, landscaping, streetscape, signs, bus shelters, those sorts of things. The project is not going to be subject to requirements for a dirt haul permit, grading permit, tree removal permits, or building permit. but it will require a city encroachment permit for works from the curb line to the property line, permits from Caltrans for work within the right-of-way, city permits to connect to the drainage system, and permits from Cal Water for connection to the water system. The project, we went through all of the conditions of approval. It's included as a table, attachment 2, showing all of the conditions of approval from the plan development, including the mitigation measures and how the project complies with those. The conditions of approval carry forward many of the plan development conditions that aren't specifically satisfied by the plans and the mitigation measures. And condition number 2 of the approval specifically requires Caltrans, or Samtrans, I'm sorry, to incorporate the conditions of approval into the construction documents, agreements, construction work, and the improvements as constructed. So the recommendation from staff is that the Planning Commission, after you hold the public hearing, that you adopt the resolution that's provided in your staff packet, the agenda packet. Please note that there was a supplemental staff report, and it is the revised resolution, which has a couple of changes identified in the supplemental staff report, including changes to the detailing on the monument sign that will be the project identification sign. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. I'm available for questions now or following the presentation by Samtrans or the public comment. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you, Colette. Does anybody have any questions for Colette right now, or do we want to wait till Samtrans? Okay. Who's up?
Thank you. What do I have to? Good evening. My name is Rafael Boland. I'm a program manager with Samtrans, and I'm going to be discussing the San Carlos Multimodal Transit Center. So what I'm going to do is provide you a brief overview of the project. What I'm really going to focus on is some of those look and feel type design features that were just discussed. And then I'm going to provide an update on the schedule, a brief description of the construction impacts, and take any questions you might have. So very briefly, the goals of this project are to transform the existing parking lot into a multimodal transit center. So to incorporate buses, taxi, bike, and other forms of accessibility. It'll also be to improve safety by providing accessibility for Samtrans buses, as well as commuter, rail, local, shuttle, taxi, pedestrian, and bicycles. And then finally, it aligns with the overall goals of Samtrans to improve transit-oriented development in the area. So some of the components that I'll focus on are that parking is being increased from the existing 201 spaces to 256 spaces. I should note that the 256 spaces does not include some of the dedicated areas for shuttle drop-off and buses, so it's actually a little bit better than the numbers would suggest, but I'll go into that in a second. It's also going to increase the shuttle capacity from 1 dedicated spots to 3 solely dedicated spots, and increase the number of bus from 2 to 6, including the drop-off area on El Camino Real on that 6 number. And then new components that are being incorporated in the design include, as I mentioned, a dedicated bus shuttle layover area, a taxi waiting area. There's actually 5 spots for taxis. There's a new kiss and ride, new bike and pedestrian access from San Carlos Avenue, and then a new vehicular access along with signalized intersection at Cherry Street. So some of the components that have been requested by the city include, we have 23, at least 23 short-term parking spaces that can be incorporated. Those are going to be signed for 3-hour parking, and they'll be located at the northernmost limits of the project site. I'll show that in a second. Car share parking, and then after-hour public use, a number of the spots, actually 100 stalls will be available after 6 p.m. Through 6 a.m. for the general public. And finally, some of the enhanced safety features that we incorporated, the most obvious being improved pedestrian crosswalks in the area. So I'm going to focus, as I mentioned, on some of the design components. So these are elements that this board has specifically requested that we focus on. So these are sort of touch and feel type of items. So here's the project overview. You've seen this already, but the northernmost element is the area up at the top. That's the area closest to the existing Caltrain station. So that you can see the shuttle drop off. The area that's colored differently is the kiss and ride and also the turnaround for the buses. You can see the dedicated buses. On the extreme upper left is the retaining wall. I'll explain that in a second. And then the parking as you head south. So one of the enhanced features is this sort of focal point entrance sign that the city's requested us. So we've been working closely with staff on this element. Another element that city staff really worked with us on is an enhanced streetscape. So this is in conformance with the city standards, but also with the Grand Boulevard Initiative that has developed its own standards. So as I mentioned, it's enhanced pedestrian, enhanced sidewalk, but also enhanced coloring and focal point crosswalks. There we go. Street furniture was another element that the city had a lot of input on. So once again, this is consistent with the Grand Boulevard. So lighting, waste disposal, benches, et cetera. And then some of the landscape features. So the city requested that the replacement trees be of that specific species, that I'll try to pronounce and get wrong, but Zelkova serrata, if that means anything to anyone. And so while the project is removing existing vegetation to make way for the transit center, we're going to replace more trees than ultimately are removed as part of the project. I mentioned the retaining wall. This is a structural element that exists only at the northernmost end. So one of the features that was mentioned as being changed from the previous iteration was some of the configuration on the northern end. And the challenge there was how to get all the parking and the shuttle and the bus and the drop-off all within the limited right-of-way available. And the truth is it just didn't fit. And something was always giving. And this, of course, being the most northerly, closest to the station, the most valuable parking, we wanted to get it right. So what we did is we went back and we actually looked at an engineering solution. So we're going to build a short retaining wall into the existing berm. And what that does is it frees up a little bit of space to allow more compatibility. So when I say retaining wall, it's limited to about 4 feet in height. And one of the elements that we're going to discuss with staff is the look and feel of that wall, the color or the texture on that wall. The bus shelter was another element that was highlighted by staff. So we are essentially installing a customized shelter to meet the city's requirements. And then kiss and ride was another element that was important. And so the new station, I mentioned the increased number of parking. Again, that doesn't include such improvements as the kiss and ride. So these will be specifically marked out as kiss and ride. They'll be colored. We'll work with the city staff on that. And they are located on the northernmost end along with the ADA, the shuttle drop-off, et cetera. Very briefly, where we are with the project schedule. This is an update. This is probably more recent information than we provided last time, but essentially advertising award has occurred. So we've awarded the contract, but we have obviously not given notice to proceed on the work. So where we are now is we have some site clearing work that has to happen in January, and that's essentially the removal of the vegetation. So that's going to start early January, and the goal is to be done before February. Notice to proceed for the main project will occur sometime in late February. It's approximately 5 months worth of work, actual shovel in the ground type of construction. Some of the impacts. So the majority of this work is daytime activity. Luckily, although it is adjacent to our railroad tracks, it does not impact our operations for virtually the whole work. So there are, however, some elements that will have to be at night. So the wall, which I mentioned, is right up against the railroad. It's possible some of that might have to be night work. And then anything that has a direct impact on El Camino could potentially, depending on how that works with Caltrans, might require some night work on that location. So in general, of course, our intent is to avoid night work. But again, if it conflicts with operations, that's where we would have to go to night work. In any event, we would notify the public well in advance of that. The other element I wanted to focus on is the use of the parking lot during construction. So to be clear, it will be open and parking will be available for the entire period of construction. So it's not going to be closed. However, in the interim, we may have to stage construction in a way that while we're working on one end, parking's on the other. So our goal is to get it all done and use the existing, but if need be, we're going to basically prioritize keeping parking open. And again, we'll let people know, and we'll have ambassadors present to let people know how to get to the Caltrain station. These are just some of the ways you can get more information. So we have a email which is dedicated to the project. We have a website which will provide this essentially weekly updates that get provided. Probably the easiest place day to day during construction to know what's going on. Here's the website. And then here's a sample email update. We do respond to all our emails, so if you have specific concerns, just get on the mail alert list and we will copy you on everything. And then I can take any questions you might have.
Who wants to start?
Go ahead.
I just had a quick question. I'm a little confused about the parking spaces, and I see some of the, north of Cherry, there was a reduction in parking spaces, and south of Cherry, there was an increase in parking spaces. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So the net is what? The net gain is?
So there's currently 201 spaces, and in the after condition, there'll be 256 spaces. Okay. That being said, what you don't see in that number is the dedicated spots. So it's 256 plus the dedicated spots. Okay. Today, there is no dedicated for things like shuttle drop-off or taxi. Okay. So it's 256 plus whatever you want that to equal out to.
Okay, great. That was my question.
Let them go, because I got lots of questions.
Scott's got lots of questions.
Yeah,
so-
go ahead, because I think I had most of my questions answered, actually.
Okay. Let's start with the retaining wall.
Sure.
Is there any way you can make that longer?
You could.
And the reason I ask that is that typically the noise from the brakes from the buses is a relatively high squeaking noise.
Right.
And having a retaining wall that actually was a little bit further to the north would minimize the noise from those brakes going over the berm and into the neighborhood.
So again, the whole reason for the retaining wall is just to gain that space. So I hear what you're saying, but if there were no retaining wall, so now let's look at the area that doesn't have a retaining wall immediately to the south. It's basically the access point.
North.
So yeah.
Yeah, so the retaining wall is to the south of the drop-off, right?
Immediately south. It's basically on the northernmost end of the parking lot.
Right. What I'm saying is, can you extend that a little bit further north?
Again, so you're saying, like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to use a laser.
So,
to extend it just to the period of the drop-off?
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
As a way of blocking that. It's like having a wall
Yeah.
instead of having the noise go up over the berm.
Well, again, the thing it would be replacing is a berm, right? So you're actually not gaining any sound deadening ability. You might actually be making it worse because you'd have a soil berm, right? So I guess I'm confused as to why.
You're not.
Why would you want to extend it?
Because the berm actually slopes away versus a solid wall that's going to be right there, which is going to bounce the noise back rather than an open space, which is going to allow it to go up and over the berm.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So in general, though, the area to the north that does not have a retaining wall, if that's a way to answer it, is not. It's only being used to turn around. So there actually is no area where the bus is continuing north of that wall. Does that make sense? The wall reflects the northernmost limit of the place you would see a bus.
That's not what the plans show. The wall only extends to about halfway through the bus location.
So when you say the wall, you're looking at the really dark
Looking
portion.
at the really dark black wall there, and you see that the buses actually go all the way, there's the bus access parking, all the way to there.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
So all I'm asking is, could we ask to have that wall extended to the drop-off? Just to deal with the brake noise.
I mean, again, it's a structural element. It's there for a structural purpose to gain that. I mean, obviously, there's a cost component, obviously, that goes along with doing that, right? I mean, it isn't the same price as leaving it as is. So, I mean...
But you're also going to cut down on complaints of noise from bus brakes from the neighborhood to the east.
I mean, we could go into the noise study that was done, but in general, I'm not sure that's 100% how it works. I mean, I hear what you're saying about the slope, but I mean,
I understand.
the reverse is equally plausible with a solid object. So, I mean, the honest truth is sound isn't that easy a thing to quantify, right? I mean, what you're saying is possible, but it's equally plausible that the reverse is true. So, I mean,
Think sound walls on freeways,
right.
okay? They're never sloped away. They're straight up and down,
That's correct.
okay, to bounce the noise away.
That's right.
So the slope over a
Yeah, I'm equivocating because this is a tough question to answer without a little bit more technical. I'd be happy to take this offline because it isn't a one-line answer. Like, there's a lot of science behind. I hear what you're saying, but maybe we could handle this offline.
well, we're going to have to make a decision tonight.
I understand.
So, okay, let's.
Well, I mean, to that regard, I mean, this is a structural element. I mean, my focus really was on the elements that this board has elected to review. So we can talk about it, but I mean, I think we're here to talk about those elements that had been previously identified.
Okay. Okay. So that was question number one. Let's take a look at the shelters again.
Sure.
So look at the shelter on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine the rain's coming this direction.
Okay.
And what you have is this tiny space there that actually blocks the wind and the rain. That was the comment that I made when this came through the project the first time. Simply looking and using the shelters that are located on the Caltrain platform and recognizing that the shelters are wholly inadequate for actually protecting the riders when it's raining out. And it looks like you've duplicated that or actually made it worse because there's less space that is actually protecting people from the wind and the rain. It's a great shelter for the sun, maybe, but if you're dealing with rain, this shelter doesn't really block any of the rain from hitting everybody that's standing in the shelter. So how would you go about correcting that?
Well, that's a good question. I would have to I'd start with the manufacturer and see what the requirements are on that. Because looking at it right now, I agree with you. I mean, just the way, I mean, at first blush, I would hope, I mean, these guys make this for a living, so I'm hoping that they've at least thought through the problems you're describing. So that's where I would start. And I mean, we worked with city staff on this quite a bit. So to answer off the cuff without going back and looking at what the history was there, I don't know that I can do that right now. But let me start with that, go back and see, because you raise a good point. I mean, it's a shelter, right? Ultimately, I mean, you don't need it on a sunny day. So
I like that it's glass. I like that it's,
Right.
I like the look of it.
Yeah.
It's just if that glass sort of protected people from the rain a little bit more. I mean, maybe there's, and I recognize that there's a handicap spot there, and I
right.
like that's included. But how do you go about protecting? Maybe it's a duplicate set of panels. Unfortunately, that probably still won't protect the handicapped person from dealing with the rain.
My question then would be for Lisa or Al, because I was under the impression during the presentation and just now that the city staff worked with Samtrans on the shelter. So do you have any explanation as to why this is kind of the shelter that was arrived at?
Sure. Yeah, so that's correct. We did work with Samtrans on the design, but it was more about the design, and this is, as the presenter noted, this is from a manufacturer, and so there's very specific requirements that they have, and so we went back and forth. And if you look at this, if you look at the handicapped area, you do have to have the ability for a wheelchair to get in and out. So it's really, you don't see like opening electric doors or anything like that on these. And the other thing is if you did bring the glass all the way over to the handicapped area, then if there was a wheelchair there, it would be very difficult for another individual to get out because they kind of bump into the wheelchair area there. So I think if you are real interested, I'm sure that Samtrans can go back to the manufacturer and see if they can widen that glass panel. Maybe the manufacturer can do that. So it's something that you could put in as a condition to maybe, you can't solve it 100%, but maybe do better than what you've got there.
Yeah. Form-wise, I think it's beautiful. Functional-wise, it doesn't work. So that's, having been on the Caltrain station platform, when it's pouring rain and the rain is coming at this from you from the side, it's nice to be able to have something in front of you. So it looks like you can actually get out from both sides. And so if you could extend that over, people could actually get out from the other side if need be, if there were somebody in a wheelchair there. Let's see, how many shelters are there and where are they located?
So there's a total of 2 shelters, and let me find on, so I know where one of them is, but you might have to help me with the second. The one is on, sorry? There we go. Okay, that's where they're at. Yeah. Yep.
There's a shelter, I believe, immediately adjacent to it, and then, or sort of at the.
On both ends, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One right immediately north of that bus and one immediately south. It's not the dark,
Yeah, no, I see it.
but they're sort of a dashed rectangle.
Yeah.
Do you have any shelters located in the drop-off? So you're going to have all these shuttles dropping people off, and they'll all be waiting in the air drop-off area as they come around the corner. Is there any type of shelter for anybody there?
You're talking about against the retaining wall?
I'm talking at this end over here, where the drop-off is.
You mean where the kiss and cry
The
is?
kiss and ride is, where you're dropping off shuttles. That's where the kiss and ride is, but
Correct.
it's also where all your shuttles are dropping off, and all your shuttles are picking up
That's correct.
all the people who are coming off the train and waiting.
Yes, that's
So
correct.
are there any shuttle,
So
are there
no,
any?
there are no shelters in that middle area.
There's there at all?
That being said, this is the closest area, obviously, to the existing station, right? So there is quite a bit to the left of the image you're seeing, but no, there are no shelters in that location.
That's something you ought to consider?
That line is also literally the line of our improvement. So we used every inch that was available to us. To put
So
in
anybody
improvements.
that gets off a train that's waiting for, say, an employee shuttle or a Samtrans bus that
Right.
comes in there is not going to have any shelter at all?
Well, I mean, there's the shelters, as you pointed out, along El Camino, and there are time shuttles. There's obviously, I guess what I was suggesting is, if it were me, I would wait in the before location before I walked out too much earlier. But no, they will not have a dedicated drop-off shelter on that side. That line that I alluded to is essentially the property line in the after condition.
Okay. And will both the shuttles on the street be facing the street?
Both the shuttles on the street. Oh, yes, that's correct. They're
Both of them will be
facing
facing El
traffic.
Camino.
You're talking about on the island,
Yeah, this bottom part here.
those buses will be going with traffic.
Right, but the shelters will be facing the buses on El
Yeah,
Camino.
Yes, that's correct,
Okay.
yes.
So people couldn't even use those if they were going to wait for the other one to simply,
Well, I mean, as you pointed out, they're glass, so I think you could. But you're right, it's not specifically set aside for that.
okay. Let's go back and talk a little bit about the construction work. And you said that there's going to be construction work at night.
Yes.
How late at night? Are you going to work all night? Can we limit the length of time that they're allowed to do construction at night?
Yeah, let me be clear on that. So first of all, yes, the contract is what would define hours. So we can put in hours that make sense. The only reason why it's a little bit more complicated is on El Camino itself, because we're going to be working under a Caltrans encroachment permit. So that's our limiting factor. On the stuff that is Samtrans owned within the Samtrans right away,
Yeah.
yes, we have leeway to do that. As I mentioned, it has no impact to train operations, so it's daytime activity.
But you,
And our contract says that. It's the things that are on El Camino where it's difficult for me to make a promise right now because I'm ultimately beholden to what Caltrans, the owner of that property, will put in our encroachment permit. So we're moving forward attempting to do daytime closures, but obviously there's impact. They're offsetting impacts, right? To work in the day means to close a lane in the day, which has traffic impacts.
right. But if we put in a condition that says you can only work outside the required hours if Caltrans makes it a requirement.
Yeah, yes. I mean, all the requirements on El Camino are 100% Caltrans driven. To answer it another way, yes, if there were no Caltrans, we would be working daytime on El Camino Real.
Okay, can we also think about limiting the grading of the property to Monday through Friday? 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's another thing I'd like to see added into the condition so that we don't have problems with dust in the evening or on the weekends.
What are the hours now?
Well, you would be able to do it the same as any of our construction hours, which means you could do it Saturday from 9 to
So we don't have a
9 to 6. So there is no,
Additional
we've
condition.
done that same thing in multiple locations and for construction projects.
For the benefit of the commission, there is a condition number 16, which is taken from the ordinance, and it does limit construction from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. But Planning Commissioner Marston is correct. It would allow it Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays.
So I'd like to change that to Monday through Friday.
Condition number 16. The following condition limits dirt haul, and that is more restrictive, again, by city ordinance.
Yes.
Through the chair, because the condition of approval is merely citing to the city code, and that's an action of the city council, I think it would be probably inappropriate for the commission to change what the ordinance says about this project, because this project has, correct me if I'm wrong, some specific requirements for it by ordinance.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear perhaps. This is part of the municipal code. It's not specifically part of the plan development,
Okay.
but it's the limitation that's contained in the municipal code for all development in terms of.
Okay, I misunderstood that. I misunderstood that part of it. But the other thing is, remember the overall issue with this very unique approval process, design review of another agency's project, and they do not have to come to us with a dirt haul permit. This is design review. So if you want to place conditions of approval, we generally have to tie that to the action that you're taking. And staff has done a very comprehensive findings and conditions of approval for this. So, for example, on the time of the grading, since we don't have a grading permit, we have to tie it to design somehow, the condition that you're considering.
Isn't the design, aren't they going to grade in order to get the appropriate design?
Yeah, but that is, I don't think.
That's not-
Causally related to the condition. You have to say, what about the design leads me to say that I can't make the findings of approval for a design review without this condition of approval. So since they don't have a grading permit, this is normally a grading condition, and we have an overall ordinance in town that regulates grading and times of this type of work. But to make it a condition of approval, you do have to tie the findings that this is state law. It's the Topanga Canyon case, very long-standing state law that if you're going to make conditions on a project, you have to tie the condition to the impacts of the approval. So in other words, design reviews before you. So what about the design leads you to say, I have to regulate the hours?
So how are we getting away with it on other projects?
Because we're issuing a
The other projects.
grading and dirt haul
The dirt haul
permit.
permit and grading.
Exactly.
I just would like to
Okay.
say that on page 2 of the resolution are the required findings 1 through 5. So you would have to, what the city attorney is saying is that looking at the findings here, these are the findings where you'd have to add wording to justify. What I have done is, because noise and hours of construction are of interest, I incorporated into this the conditions or the requirements that are in the municipal code, both to inform the applicant, but also anybody else who might look at the permit. So if you're going to limit the hours, you have to be able to tie it to one of these 5 findings.
I see what you're saying, Greg. It is frustrating because we've literally been limiting almost every other construction, grading and dirt haul. We've been excluding Saturdays very recently, so I see where Scott's coming from. But I guess if we can't do it, we can't do it. But boy, would that be nice, Samtrans, to not do it on Saturdays.
So let me ask our city attorney, is there a way we can do it?
These are, we don't have, I mean, because we don't have a grading and dirt haul permit here, I'm having trouble here thinking of a way to tie the design review to the timing of the construction, so I'll just be upfront about that. Let me just look at the findings here.
Landscaping somehow?
I just see the projects, the admonition in the staff report is correct, that the landscaping and the look and feel of the project, if it just doesn't tie into the timing of the construction. It does, if you want to say, hey, indirectly, I suppose, if you said, and this is one of those famous hypotheticals, I like to go to the extreme. If you said, we don't want any trees on this project, well, that might implicate grading because they don't have to do the grading that would be associated with not having any trees on the project. Also, the retaining wall you talked about earlier, extending the retaining wall, well, that might lead to more time of grading because, so it's an indirect effect, but to condition the approval based upon a time limitation of grading, I think just that doesn't work on a design review application.
Okay. Let's see, what else have I got here? Let's move on to trees. And so I actually sent an email to city staff and asked that the trees not be removed on the property, and particularly the pine trees, until the Planning Commission had a chance to weigh in. And part of that was to give me an opportunity to look at where those pine trees are located and to recognize that there isn't, because I didn't have a set of plans in my hand when the approval came from city staff to allow you to cut those trees down. And knowing that it was coming here, I wanted to see the plans before. Seeing the plans, I agree that the pine trees need to go. But in as part of that, my concern is that if, and within the supplemental staff report, you see a picture of the trees. So I've actually got a series of trees that I'd like everybody, pictures of the trees looking from the other side, okay? Looking from Cherry Street. What these trees do actually is block looking at really any tall buildings that are going to be put in the downtown. And we know that Wheeler Plaza is going to be 50 feet. We know that, the plans for El Camino Real are going to be 50 feet. And you mentioned the species of the tree that was requested by city staff to be put along El Camino.
Right.
And do you know the height of that tree?
35 feet,
Okay.
fully grown.
So that's not tall enough for me. And so my concern is that I would like to see taller trees along El Camino in locations where they're opposite the ends of the streets, particularly Cherry and Hall Street. And that will compensate for the pine trees, which at the moment block all kinds of views of the downtown.
So, Mr. Chairman, perhaps I could start to respond to that comment. So a couple of things. I think that what we want to do is have a consistent appearance along El Camino and maintain the standards that were adopted for the streetscape on El Camino, which would be the Zelkova. So it'd be the same on both sides. So to maintain that design continuity on El Camino. Couple of things about this. There may be a way to do it with trees that are in the parking lot in that same location. So there's 4 Chinese pistache trees that are proposed right about in the same location as where that stone pine is. If you look on the plan there, you see those, you see the entrance to Cherry.
Yep.
If you make a left turn, those first 2 trees and then those second row of trees as you drive in, well, that stone pine is right sort of over to the left, and it might be about 50 feet wide. So in that parking area there, the Chinese pistache gets to about 35 feet and I think 25 to 35 feet wide as well. And they would be closer than the ones on El Camino in addition to that. So those are pretty substantial trees, and because there's 4 of them in that location and they're staggered, I don't think that what you see on the screen represents the maturity of those trees either. I think that you're going to get more screening than is anticipated there. So you're going to get a fair amount of screening out of those trees that are there. I don't know exactly how high that existing stone pine tree is, but I think that those trees at 35 feet will block any development that you see on El Camino at 50 feet, because El Camino, the development on El Camino is another 75 feet away from that. So as you look in a perspective, these trees will block your view. What it will do is open up more view of the hillside. So I think that the 35-foot tree would block the development, but would open up a bit more of your view. As you can see, that stone pine tree at the end of the street there, without it, you're going to see the top of the hillside as you go farther away from the berm. And I'm not sure, I think I've heard in the past that some folks in the neighborhood are interested in that. in seeing the hillside, but I would defer to you, of course, on that. But I think in our discussions at the Transit Village meetings, I did hear that some people wanted the view of the hills, but I could be wrong about
Yeah,
that.
well, they wanted the view of the hills, but they didn't want to see a building.
Right.
Okay, so, and I'm not sure that a 25-foot tree or even a 35-foot tree is going to block a 50-foot building. The further you get away from it, the more you're going to see of the building.
Scott, how
And
tall would you say this, in the pictures that you're giving us? How
I
tall
would
would you
say
say that
that's
is?
probably 50 feet.
50? Okay.
But it's
That's
up
my guess,
close.
too.
Okay?
Okay.
So, you know, the way I look at it is, there's no way we're going to be able to put a 50-foot tall building, a tree, on the other side of El Camino if there's a development there.
Right.
Okay? So what I'm looking for is trees as part of this project. I have a Chinese pistache in front of my house. It's been there for 10 years. It's 25 feet. It's never going to get any taller than it is. I don't have to worry about the wires and things like that. So I'm looking for, and I understand not along El Camino because you want the same thing. I had those 4 trees and 2 other trees circled on a plan as possible trees to replace with something taller, something that is 40 or 50 feet rather than 25 feet. Because if 25 feet, even at 30 feet, 35 feet there, as you get back a dozen houses on these streets, you're going to be able to see whatever is built along El Camino, unless we put trees in now that will have the ability to grow to a height. The other thing is, the taller the trees, the less the heat impact on the parking lot, because we're now shading the parking lot more.
Which trees on this plan, Scott, are you thinking? Obviously, the interior trees, but I see,
I'm sure Al and I are looking at the same trees. So if you look at this particular picture,
yeah?
okay, in here, it's the colored one.
So if you look at the screen,
Or
this is about where the stone pine tree is in this location here.
Okay.
And so these are the Chinese pistache that I was referring to here.
yeah. And then
I
the
mean, I
same
guess-
with the 2 on the other side,
This right here, you mean?
the direction, the other way.
South?
So those
Here?
2 will be across from Hall Street.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, you know, I think that, is the landscape architect here tonight, or?
No, I'm afraid not.
Okay. I mean, from a land, you know, you really have to talk to a landscape architect, but I guess the commission could condition it to ask for a taller tree in that location instead of this, you know, as a alternative to the Chinese pistache, you could ask for a taller tree. But I think that it should all be consistent.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't understand the scale. I mean, I wouldn't be for replacing 2 trees and keeping everything else the same. It just doesn't
Yeah.
make sense from a scale
You'd
standpoint.
want all those Chinese pistache to be replaced with a taller tree, and so. Yeah. But I think that if you look at this photo here,
Yep.
where you're farther away, I think that a 35-foot tree, if it was full, if you had a full canopy and it was mature, that you wouldn't be able to see a 50-foot high building on El Camino Real, because it would be too far in the distance. So that's but that's a personal opinion, and you know, we don't have any perspectives on that.
Assuming that a telephone pole is 35 feet. Okay. You can see the telephone pole in the distance there. Actually, that's taller than a telephone pole. And you assume that the top of this tree is, say, 50 feet, and the piece that juts out to the side is, say, 25, you're still going to see a good chunk of a 50-foot building.
I think what Al's saying, though, is that because it would be further on the other side of El Camino, that the distance, the visual distance
diminishes, yeah,
would be
as it-
diminished. Though I see your point, Scott. You're thinking,
The further back
Right.
you stand, the more you're going to see.
it's really hard to guess without renderings.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to guess that watering the lot more than twice a day is also one of those things that I'm not going to be able to ask for.
Oh, you mean from a dirt
From the
perspective?
dust control.
From the dirt construction attenuation.
That would be another one of those things like grading
That'd
to
be
hours.
related to the grading, but there is other municipal codes that cover best practices for construction, so.
Okay, and we do have the 24-hour hotline to make sure that if there are issues with dust from grading, that will be, if they use the hotline.
We're very aware of the issue, Mr. Marsters.
Thank you. I think that's all I have for the moment.
Okay.
Just to clarify, are you saying that all these trees here are ones that you would want to be taller?
No, originally he was just saying a couple, but yeah.
I mean, if we were going to say.
I would like to have
Maybe all of them.
6 of them be taller. And Al is suggesting that if we have any of them taller, then we should make them all taller. I'm wondering if there's a species of tree that we could, is the same species that could be allowed to grow in some locations, but not allowed, but kept relatively low, 25 feet in other locations.
And through the chair, in looking at it now, those 6 at the main area of the transit station, you could do a different tree than the rest of the Chinese pistache trees because that area has a different function. And so it would, theoretically, you could do something a little bit different aesthetically there because of that. And it would demarcate it in a different way aesthetically, and it would be consistent, I think, with, you could do something consistent with the rest of the design and still keep those other pistache trees, so.
Okay.
Scott, is that it for you?
That's it for me for the moment.
Just a question for staff before we open for public comment. Was there any other written public input since we received the report? Okay, thank you. That's it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any public comment on this? Anybody want to?
Good evening. I came here not really interested in this, but I'm curious, is there going to be a fee schedule for the parking? How will it be? How will fees be increased? Is there anything related to cost for parking at the proposed site?
Sure.
So the 100 spots that I mentioned that are for the local parking, there's no fee from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning. There's also up to, a minimum of 23 spots that are short-term parking. Those are 3 hours only. There's no fee for that as well. Caltrain parking has its own fee schedule. So if you're parking in a Caltrain spot, then it's normally $5 a day.
Okay, thank you. Sir, did you want to? Absolutely. Come on up.
I would like to hear a little more detail on the outdoor lighting plan.
The outdoor lighting plan.
So I didn't touch on the lighting, but that was another element we worked closely with staff on. So it's 55 watt, you said, lighting, and it's on both sides. So there's enhanced lighting along El Camino, and then as well on the parking lot area as well. So you actually, unfortunately, can't see it in that overview, but it's trying to pick it out on the southern lot. You can't actually see it on that view, but it's on both sides. The spacing's what?
Approximately how many
Feet on center?
light fixtures?
So about 30 to 40
Okay.
in there.
Through the chair, the condition limiting the lighting for the new LED lights to 55 came from the city engineer based on the experience with Old County Road where they've been changed out to be the lower wattage, and that's the criteria that's been set out in the conditions of approval.
Great, thank
And
you,
Colette, do they shine down? Okay,
Yes,
because the
they are
ones on Old
downward
County
directed
are
and shielded,
are-
yeah.
are not shielded, if I remember correctly. They just shine everywhere. And the same with the ones at the train, or am I
Well, the
missing
ones along
something?
the street, I'm going to look to Al, is those are the ones that are on Old County Road would be the same design that would be used on El Camino Real. It would be this consistent with the street design.
There it is. Okay.
Okay, so they're going to be like this. They're not going to have the single bulb that sits on top as well as this. Because if I remember, aren't the ones on Old County, don't they have a globe that sits on top of this? So they're bright all the way around and then they shine down? And the ones at the train station just are bright all the way around?
So these are the ones on El Camino. I guess the question would be internal to the parking area. I don't know if there's any tall lights inside the transit station area. But we know that the ones on El Camino are designed like this, but I'm not sure about inside.
Yeah, so it's slightly different. It still has a baffle. It doesn't look quite as elaborate as that, but in concept, it's the same idea. You're trying to direct lighting so you don't get that splashback.
So it's facing down, it's not facing, because they're going to be tall enough that they're going to be seen from the east side neighborhood. So I want to make sure that they shine down and not into people's, yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Can I get a motion to close the public hearing on this one item, please?
I move that we close public comment on this item.
Second.
Can I get a roll call vote?
Commissioner Harper Pedersen?
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters?
Yes.
Commissioner Silverman is still absent. Vice Chair Bergman?
Yes.
Chair Gutierrez?
Yes. Okay, any other further questions? Scott, I know you wanted to try to...
You want me to craft a motion?
Ones we can craft, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it sounded like the only one we really could craft was having taller trees on the north segment,
Yep. And
which I'm fine with.
And ask them to go back and look at the design of the shelters.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Other than that, can you
We
put,
can't make any condition on it, we can just ask them
Motion
to.
on the screen, please.
well, I guess we don't have to make it a condition, but, I mean,
That's a request.
common sense would dictate that you'd go back and look at those shelters and come up with a plan, working with city staff, obviously, that protects the people who ride the trains and buses better. So I move that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution approving the design review for the transit center, subject to the findings and conditions in the resolution, with the additional condition of replacing the 6 trees at the northern end of the parking structure, the parking lot, internally with taller trees that will grow to at least 40 to 50 feet in height.
I'll second that.
Can I get a roll call vote?
Yes, prior to taking the vote, I'd just like to clarify that the supplemental staff report resolution does include all of the conditions related to the monument sign. So the commission would be adding to the resolution that's within the supplemental staff report. Thank you.
Yes.
One other point through the chair, just to clarify the instructions that you're giving to staff. I didn't hear in the motion some discretion with staff to select the species of tree. I mean, it's okay to put the parameters in there, but I think you probably want to.
Yeah.
Yes.
I assumed that would be in consultation with staff.
So we would add a condition that says that the 6 trees at the north of Cherry shall be replaced with a taller tree, 40 to 50 feet, subject to the review and approval of the community development director, and that would be done in consultation with Sam
Let's say
Chance.
across from Cherry Street and north.
Okay.
North, yeah.
Inside the parking lot.
Interior.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we're all on the same page.
Commissioner Marsters, can I ask you to repeat those 2 conditions just for clarification? I got the first one, but not the second one.
I think there was only one.
Yeah.
Or was it just the one
It
with
was
the
just
trees?
the one
Oh, I
on the
thought there was a
trees.
second one.
Yeah, we decided that it was just common sense for them to work with staff on the shelters.
Thank you. So I'll
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen.
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters.
Yes.
Commissioner Silverman is absent. Vice Chair Bergman.
Yes.
And Chair Gutierrez.
Yes. Thank you very much. If you recall, we substituted planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects before item C. So, staff, do we have any reports, updates of current projects, or a presentation, possibly?
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Jay Walter, City's Public Works Director. And I was asked to come in tonight to give you an update on the Four Corners traffic study. And for the Commission's and public's benefit, the Four Corners group was formed after years of continuing problems with traffic congestion along San Carlos Avenue at its intersection with Alameda de las Pulgas in the vicinity of Carlmont High School and Tierra Linda Middle School. So the description, the Four Corners Working Group, denotes those 4 agencies that got together and began to participate in discussions, first of all, to identify the problems, issues, and concerns, and then to begin collaborating on some potential solutions. So on the screen in front of you just kind of shows that project area. And as the city of San Carlos enters from the kind of the bottom right of the screen, we have a signalized intersection at Dartmouth Avenue and San Carlos Avenue there. And then we transition into the city of Belmont. So a good portion of this work would be done in the city of Belmont, but also work would be required, or we would hope would be done on both campuses, as well as some work within the city of San Carlos. So the Four Corners Working Group began to meet on a fairly regular basis a little over, well, probably about 2.5 years ago to talk about this with representatives from the city councils and the school boards to talk about the various problems. So the questions that came up, were there going to be an ability to have new school access locations? Were there be frontage improvements that would need to be made? How about new sidewalks? How about the parking that is out there, especially along Alameda de las Pulgas now, where there's diagonal parking along the Carlmont frontage? What about pickup and drop-off? The intersection controls and the bicycle and pedestrian safety in general. A lot of concerns and a lot of issues that had to be dealt with. So we went ahead and between the 4 agencies, we split the cost to hire a consultant to come in and conduct a traffic study. All of these issues were evaluated. Data was collected during school pickup and drop-off times, traffic counts, bicycle counts, pedestrian counts, and lots of data on the physical infrastructure along the frontage for the 2 streets within the city, plus the circulation patterns that were on each of the school campuses. So our consultant did a very thorough job in evaluating the existing conditions. And we had 2 public meetings that were fairly well attended, where a lot of this was sort of tested with the public. Are we seeing the right things? Are we kind of gathering the right data? Are we looking at what would be considered to be good positive solutions and alternatives? So the consultant at the time developed 3 alternatives that we began to really thoroughly vet with the public and the agencies involved. And on the screen, you can see in front of you essentially it's the stretch of Alameda de las Pulgas, which is between the 2 schools. And this alternative 1 had a new traffic signal entrance with entry points onto the school campuses at that midpoint along Alameda de las Pulgas. As you can see off to the left, there was also a roundabout that was discussed for the intersection with Chula Vista and Alameda, and then a traffic signal down at the intersection of El Verano. This one was evaluated and along with another alternative, which had all roundabouts at the entry points. Now, the interesting part here is that the roundabout, while not a very common feature here along the peninsula, although getting to be more so in certain communities, it would become a replacement for the 4-way stops that are present at El Verano and Chula Vista, which pretty much everybody recognized as the main traffic clogs for having to be able to get through the corridor. That, in combination with the pedestrian crossings for school kids at those times of day, it just was not allowing for any real good flow of traffic. Now, the roundabouts themselves, they allow for access points from either side on the school or the side street. They do allow for some pedestrian crossing, but what they do is they slow traffic speeds. So traffic speeds in the corridor through here, we expect would be down in the 10 to 15 mile per hour range, but they would be moving slowly rather than stop, 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 stop. So we kind of begin to kind of gather around the idea that roundabouts were a good potential solution for the intersections within the corridor. Now, the third alternative that was studied, it created a roundabout at the intersection of Cranfield and Alameda San Carlos Avenue, which, as you can see at the very lower right of the screen there. Now, that's another interesting location, because in the current situation, you have the high school exit point, you have Cranfield Avenue, you have the church parking lot driveway, and you have the 2 main streets. What this does at that location, and it becomes a very efficient intersection this way, is the exit point from the high school is diverted through their parking lot to a point that's along Alameda at a middle point where you can go right in or right out. And we end up with only 1 leg on that intersection that serves the Cranfield and church parking lot areas. So this alternative 3, this particular feature of alternative 3 was very well received by many members of the public as well as the agencies involved. Now, the entry points for the schools, as you can see, there's right in and right out entry points. There's no left turns in or left turns out. In fact, there's a median that we propose to put in between the roundabout at Cranfield all the way down to the roundabout at Chula Vista. What this does also is it helps to eliminate random crossings by pedestrians at various points along there, and it helps to organize the parking along the edge of the street for school drop-off and pickup, or parking, as the schools have identified a need for some parking. And so what you're seeing there on the slide in the area that's blue, that would be identified as parallel parking along both school frontages, and it's not the diagonal parking anymore. So that's a big change, gives us a lot of extra room. The yellow area could be used for either parallel parking of staff or students, or it could be used for pickup or drop-off zones. It also can be used for a portion of the area where we would need to provide for transit stops. The roundabout installations, some of the concerns that were identified as it related to pedestrians, where, well, you're still going to have kids crossing the street, and they're still going to be crossing at uncontrolled intersections. But what we've also determined and recommended in the final plan is that crossing guards would be employed. And there's, in the city of San Carlos, for example, right now, we have 3 locations where we're partnering with the school district to share the cost of hired crossing guards to come in and actually help to organize the pedestrian behavior. It's been very successful, and so we use that as sort of a model to recommend that that would be something which we believe would help with pedestrian flow at these locations during school pickup and drop-off times. So we're looking at this alternative 3, and as the recommendation began to kind of favor that, the school districts were concerned that we were fixing their point of access along Alameda. And we told them that, no, that's not true. You have ability within your own campus plans to decide where you want that entry point to be, because they don't have to be opposite each other. They're right in, right out only, so they can be slightly offset and wherever best fits the campus plans. That was one of the key points of flexibility in this, was to give the schools the ability to help plan out their own internal circulation and the entry point that came in off of Alameda. For these various components of Alternative 3, the roundabouts and the school entry points, construction can happen independently. That is, as there would be different times when funding might be available, then projects can proceed independently. We expect that there would be less queuing from the roundabouts because we would have some flow that would not be always stop, stop, stop. And we believe we've designed what we consider to be a better alternative for the Cranfield intersection. And we also have maintained bike lanes throughout the corridor as well. On the frontage for the TR Linda campus, for example, we're going to be setting back that frontage and providing continuous sidewalk all the way along that edge. So that's an advantage that is not there now. If you've been by that point, there's a sidewalk to a certain point, and then after that, it's just dirt along the edge of the roadway, kind of behind the curb. So we feel like this is a really good feature that will help for pedestrian accessibility. So the frontage improvements, again, the new sidewalk, we're getting some widening through there. We have bike lanes that we'll be maintaining. The pedestrian crossing areas will have refuge islands for the pedestrian crossings. So we believe that instead of having to cross all the way, you can cross to a midpoint and then cross again when it's safe. The fences will prevent, in the median area across along Alameda, they will prevent that random crossing, and the crossing guards, we believe, will help to organize the pedestrian behavior. So the features for Alternative 3 have come together. This has been essentially endorsed by the agencies, or it's going to the agencies for endorsement of the final plan, but the working group itself endorsed Alternative 3 as the preferred alternative for the traffic study in this work in this area. So the final report is being prepared by our consultant. It should be to each of the agencies for an endorsement, which would be in the form of a resolution. We would be able to take that and then apply for grant funding to be able to help construct this. We expect that the 4 agencies together will make a very good grant application, and the collaboration and the cooperation between them will help to achieve kind of greater points for this is more of just a one little spot isolated solution. This is one that creates solutions for a corridor. We'll have to proceed, of course, once we receive some funding with the design and environmental approval, and then it could be that construction needs to take place during the summer just simply because of the traffic impacts. And we're giving it a 3 to 5 year window to be completely done if we can line up the funding, but we would obviously hope to be moving sooner if we could get the funding to begin that work. But we believe we've come up with a really good solution. And one of the interesting things, too, is before the commission tonight, the development proposal that you'll be hearing about at the house property. Essentially, what I think the developer has done and staff has done is worked hard to try to incorporate and integrate that plan to be able to work well with the Four Corners traffic study design. And that was important. It was a late arrival into the process, but we were able to work with the developer to come up with what we think is going to be a good solution. We had our traffic consultant, as part of the Four Corners study, also do some modeling with the proposed development, and the traffic congestion is not significantly different than if the property remained the same and we had all the parking and access on and off of the property that exists today. So we're looking forward to that project, if the commission approves it and it moves forward, being something that works well with the traffic study and the recommendations that we've made. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Great. Thank you, Jay.
I have one quick question. Can you go back a couple of slides? This is just so is this yellow pick up and drop off?
That's what's proposed to be, yes.
Okay. And the blue is parking?
That's parking, right.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just a comment. I would have never believed, not having a lot of experience with roundabouts, I would have never believed how much they can ease traffic congestion until I saw it with my own eyes in a town that my parents live in Nevada, replacing a stoplight with a roundabout and how much quicker the traffic moved. Now, admittedly, there weren't a lot of pedestrians in that area, so it was really more for traffic movement, but it was a big, big difference in a positive direction in traffic flow. So that's it.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it. Since we're on that topic, when it comes to planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects, do we want to just go into that? And then we'll go back to the agenda item? Okay, sure. All right, moving along. And I'm thinking that this is why everybody's here. Item C, 2811 San Carlos Avenue, request for conditional use permit for small lot, single unit development, design review, tentative map, graded and dirt hall certificate, and BMR housing plan.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Lisa Costa-Sanders, Principal Planner. As you indicated, the requested entitlements is for 11 new single-family residences at 2811 San Carlos Avenue. Just to orient you briefly, the subject site is located at the corner of San Carlos Avenue and Club Drive. The site is located near two churches, a preschool, Cromont High School, Tierra Linda Middle School, and the subject site is zoned RS6, which is our single-family zoning designation, and it's surrounded by single-family homes. The existing conditions, the top image is the view from San Carlos Avenue of the existing church building and surface parking. A bus stop is located in front of the site near Club Drive, and a driveway is located to the west side of the site, serving the adjacent church and preschool. And the lower image is a view from Club Drive at the Bayview Drive crosswalk. This gravel area is used for drop-off and pickup of students and some parents turning around. The project involves demolition of the existing church building and the associated site improvements for the construction of 11 new single-family homes with a private internal roadway and landscape improvements. The design entitlements before you this evening include design review approval of the design of the new single-family homes, a conditional use permit for the small lot single unit development standards, tentative parcel map approval for the subdivision, grading for the cut and fill of approximately 8,100 cubic yards of soil, and approval of a below market rate housing plan to allow the payment of an in lieu housing fee. First, with design review, the developer proposes 3 different home plans with individual lot variations. All of the homes are designed with contemporary architectural style. The one on the screen right now is Plan B, and this particular one is located on Lot 1, which is located along San Carlos Avenue. That top view of the perspective would be the front that would be viewed from San Carlos Avenue, and the lower is the rear that would be viewed from the internal road where the garage would be oriented. The exterior materials include a mix of stucco finish, hardy siding, and the roofs are proposed with a standing seam metal roof. This is Plan C, which is located on Lot 7, located along Club Drive, and that 2-story front elevation is oriented to Club Drive, and then it steps down to the 3-story rear level elevation, which is oriented to the internal private drive. This is the view as you would see it from San Carlos Avenue. So that top view would be the homes located along San Carlos Avenue, and the lower view would be seen from the internal private driveway. And I can pass it on to The developers hired a color specialist to assist with the color selection, and so I'm just passing around that color board for you to review. And then this is the view from Club Drive. The top would be facing Club Drive, and that lower elevation would be the rear of the homes that would be fronting on the internal private roadway. And then here you can just see how it steps down. They tried to take advantage of the existing grade and just really utilize grading for developing those building pads and the roadways. So you see at the top screen, you start from Club Drive, Lot 9, work your way down to Lot 2 at San Carlos Avenue. And then the lower elevation is more of an internal view, kind of starting from the church parking lot and crossing over to Club Drive. Landscaping, as I noted in the staff report, there's significant landscaping along the perimeter of the site, and it does comply with the gateway overlay zone with the wide landscape strip along San Carlos Avenue. The conditional use permit request is to apply the small lot development standards, and that allows a minimum lot size of 2,000 square feet with a minimum 30-foot width. The homes are proposed with lots of 4,400 square feet to 6,400 square feet in area, so it does comply and exceed the minimum lot size standards. And then the home sizes range from 2,400 square feet to a little over 3,200 square feet in area. This project does comply with the maximum project site floor area, the minimum site landscaping. There's also the small lot standards have minimum personal storage space, which is not included in the standard single-family zoning district, as well as minimum usable open space. The project does comply with these standards as well as the RS6 development standards. The tentative map is to establish the individual lots for the 11 new single-family homes, the common open space, and the common area for the new 25-foot wide private internal streets, as well as the adjacent parking. And that is something that's a little unique to this project. As you see on the lower portion of the screen, it's outlined as common area shaded, and that actually is going to serve the parking for the adjacent church. The project also, provides 8 guest parking spaces within that private roadway area. Grading and dirt haul, the proposal is to cut approximately 2,300 cubic yards of soil, fill 5,800. You do the math, you're importing 3,500 cubic yards of soil. And the dirt haul route takes you from San Carlos Avenue, Alameda to Ralston, and then most likely Highway 101. The code requires that affordable housing be provided on site, or if the developer is able to show a financial hardship, that gives the opportunity to pay the affordable housing in lieu fee as an alternative to providing on site. Here, the code will require 1 low-income unit and 1 moderate-income unit. We've estimated the sales price of the low-income unit as $193,000 and the moderate-income unit as $450,000. The developer has submitted the financial feasibility. We've had that reviewed by our outside consultant, and staff does concur with the developer's request to pay the fee rather than provide those units on site. The fee is estimated at just under $1 million, and it'll be calculated at time of building permit issuance for payment due, I believe, at occupancy. The developer did conduct several outreach meetings with the community, and concerns were related to the size of the development, parking, traffic, view impacts also expressed. And the developer was able to revise the project to respond to many of those comments. I'm sure you'll hear some more this evening. Staff provided the public notice to all property owners within 300 feet and also utilized the developer's expanded notice that included everyone that attended the meeting and published the notice in the Daily Journal. Conditions of approval, I want to point out because some of them are unique, and actually one was missing. So we do want to add a requirement that the garages be utilized for parking of 2 vehicles, and no personal storage may be located within the garage. That would restrict the parking of 2 vehicles, and the developer has agreed to that. My apologies for not including it, so we want to add that. And just wanted to also let you know that we have requirements to implement the recommendations of the peer review architect with the final design details. And then, as indicated by our Public Works Director, there is a requirement to close the adjacent access to parking for the church property from San Carlos Avenue, and that's in accordance with the Four Corners plan. And here's the motion before you. I would be happy to try to answer any of your questions, and the developer is also here to give a brief presentation.
Does anybody have any questions currently?
No.
No, but I think I wanted to disclose the ex parte communications
Yeah.
Sure.
with the developer prior to this meeting. You can review the plans.
Okay.
So I did the same. I met with the developer in late December.
I did the same.
Yeah, I did.
In January.
I did as well, but I think it was in December sometime. I don't remember exactly when, but, okay. I have one speaker card, which I'm pretty sure that's not all that wants to speak, so.
Can I ask one question of staff before she sits down? So you made a requirement that the garage be used for 2 cars. How do you enforce that?
Typically, it's enforced by the homeowners association, and we'll make sure that's included in the CCNRs. But if the homeowners association fails to enforce it, then city would enforce it through our code enforcement process as a violation of the conditional use permit design review certificate.
So is that because there's no parking for vehicles on the streets?
Right, there would be no parking directly in front with the streets with the internal road. There is 8 parking spaces that would be available that somebody could certainly use.
And so what if somebody only has 1 car?
Then they would need to keep the other free for their visitor.
So they're still not allowed to use the garage for storage,
Correct.
even in anticipation of a visitor? Okay.
And I've had experience enforcing this in 2 other jurisdictions that I've worked in. We've had that as a requirement included in the CCRs. And actually, the other homeowners usually notify the homeowners association of a violation. And it's enforced quite well.
Actually, I live in a homeowners, I have part of a homeowners association, and ours, we don't enforce it that well, but I mean, people want to use their driveways. So I'm curious, I mean, if the homeowners decide, because the HOA is basically run by homeowners, if they decide that they don't want to enforce that, then.
If the city receives a complaint, we can enforce it.
Okay. Oh, one other question, I'm sorry. I apologize. Now, the traffic exit will be on to Club?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
One more question, sorry. It's a private road.
Correct.
So the city is not responsible for any repairs to that road.
Correct.
The HOA is responsible for everything, including repaving and sweeping and everything.
And lighting as well?
Everything.
Okay.
I don't have any more questions, so. You good? Okay, thank you. So I've got one speaker card so far. Cecily Harris.
Well, I don't have a problem with the housing, but I have a problem on the impacts this will cause to the neighborhood. The Four Corners plan is going to be horrifically bad to Cranfield Avenue, as will this plan. Closing the driveway for the Tongan Church onto San Carlos Avenue and bringing all that traffic onto my street is going to be insane. They already have a lot of traffic on my street for their other parking lot and for the Wonder Years. We have 4 new houses going in my street right now. What will also happen with this project is the closure of the parking area in front of the house, the church there. Where are they all going to park? Where are the parents going to do the drop-off? Where are the students going to park? That is not the developer's problem, but it's going to be the neighborhood's problem. I'm just greatly concerned about that. Your conditional use permit suggests that the project won't be adverse to the safety and the general welfare of the community, which it will. It will be detrimental to the surrounding properties. So I ask that the city consider adding some additions to their conditional use permit to alleviate some of the likely impacts. Prohibit Carlmont High School parking in the Tongan Church parking lot, accessible from Cranfield Avenue. Prohibit Carlmont High School student drop-off on on Cranfield Avenue, although they already do. And the parents park where it says no stopping. That is not enforced. And in fact, the police never come when you call. I've lived there since 1999. I've never seen a policeman on my street. I call constantly. I would also like to have the city provide for resident-only parking permits on the street in the neighborhoods around the high school, because the students will be parking on our street in illegal parking spaces, and the police never come when we call about it. We need to be able to live our lives in the neighborhood. There are several thousand students, staff, and parking arriving every day, and they're predicting, about 500 more students in the next 3 years? Where are they all going to park? Where they're going to drop off their kids? And I would like to see more of an effort for a bike lane. I live in the neighborhood. I maybe see 2 bikes a day. Bicyclists are scared to ride in that neighborhood. There's a curve on the upper San Carlos Avenue. There are cars parked on both sides of the street. People aren't going to bike in there. You can spend all the money you want saying, share the road with bikes. It's not going to happen. I'm also concerned about construction because I've lived through numerous construction on my street and in the next door high school. I would like to see construction prohibited before 8 in the morning and on weekends. I would also like to see the dirt hall maintained because we have dirt flying all over the neighborhood. The current houses being built on my street, on the upper part of Cranfield Avenue, we have rivers of mud coming down the street because they're not containing their mud. They're not containing the flow of water and drainage down the street, even though I heard there were conditions imposed on the developer, but the developer is getting out of doing any of these conditions. I would also like to see a prohibition on idling of construction vehicles or stopping or parking on my street when these 11 homes are built. Because everybody parks on my street when there's construction in the area. I would also like to prohibit construction workers from parking their personal vehicles on my street. I would also like to see a parking in lieu fee. I'm seeing developer fees going into more housing, but what about quality of life in this area? We need to see some funding going to parks, not just housing and traffic.
Thank you. Bonnie, did you want to? Thank you, Bonnie.
Bonnie McClure, 128 North M Avenue, San Carlos. I'm not going to speak on the project itself. I think that you are capable of doing that. I'm quite concerned about the in lieu fee for the below market housing. On page 12 of your staff report, they say that the in lieu fee is going to be a little short of $1 million. By the contractors or developers' own figures, if he had 2 units to build, one at the lower figure of $1.7 million and the other of the higher figure, $1.9 million, that would be $3,661,000. 2 units built at the selling price that's allowed by the formula in the lieu would be $643,551. $3,017,429. Okay. So he's asking, or the city is saying that they're going to get a lieu fee of $997,555. Well, there's more than $2 million in there, sitting in there, that the developer's going to make if you let him get by with paying less than $1 million for an in lieu fee. All right, so you have an in lieu fee that has been figured. But most communities have a community benefits fee. And I'm wondering if we can't get something that's approaching the $2 million in a community benefits fee, if you can't call it more, for a in lieu fee. And for future developments, I suggest that we really look at the in lieu fee, something like this. There's just too much in here, over $2 million for the developer. I don't get it.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Before we move on, can we have staff address that comment?
So the code establishes the affordable sales price that we've outlined, and it also establishes the formula for calculating the in lieu fee. The developer has indicated through his financial analysis that it's not financially feasible to provide those units on site due to that large gap that Ms. McClure just outlined. And that's why the developer is requesting payment of the fee rather than provide the 2 units, given that it's such a deep subsidy to provide the units on site. The question was, could we add a community benefit or a higher fee? Unfortunately, we don't have the legal authority to impose a higher fee, and we don't have in place a community benefits ordinance at this time.
Can you explain the gap?
There's
I'm sorry,
two.
go
No, go
Yes,
ahead.
go ahead.
I'm not understanding what you're calling the gap. Could you please explain that a little bit?
Sure. So the, I should probably go back to where that slide was. Okay. The developer is estimating a sales price of between 1.7, 1.8 million, and he can certainly expand on that. And the codes would require a low-income unit at $193,000.
Okay.
So there's well over $1 million right there.
Okay.
$1.5 million. And then the moderate income unit sales price would be $450,000, where a market rate would sell at maybe 1.7. So I think that's what Ms. McClure was alluding to, is there's a significant difference between if they provided those 2 units on site as opposed to paying the fee. The developer's indicating providing the units would be financially infeasible because it's such a deep subsidy. But I think the other point she raised was about the parks. There is 2 requirements, and they're included as conditions of approval. One is for a park dedication fee, and the other is for a parks facilities fee. So there's 2 separate fees that this project would need to contribute towards.
How much are those?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't calculate those fees.
Oh, random guess.
One is $1,000 per bedroom, and the other is a ratio based on the size of the development.
And that just goes into a fund?
I was wondering if maybe down the road in the very near future, if we can get maybe a presentation on affordable housing and the in lieu fee and how that's calculated. I think that we all need to grasp that a little bit better than we do right now. Okay. Thank you.
I could just give you the basics on that. State law, in order for us to impose a development fee, we have to not only have an ordinance that allows for it, but we also have to do a fee study that calculates the fee. This fee is based upon a fee study that is about 4 or 5 years old. And I think we're on schedule to revisit the fee. But I do know from talking with other cities that our fee is one of the higher fees on the peninsula, even with our current fee study and structure. So,
I was going to save this for comments, but I guess since we're talking about in lieu fees, I think my ongoing concern about developers paying in lieu fees versus putting the units within their development is creating some sort of below market housing ghetto that we then pay for. I'm assuming the city has a better plan than what is in my mind for this money, but the idea is to put people within the actual, people of lower economic means within the actual community. So I guess building an entirely separate community for them seems to be at odds with the whole below market housing ideals.
And there is a reason, there's actually a constitutional reason and case law dealing with these fees, and the fee study is part of the justification, but we have the relief from our fee is where someone can show it's financially infeasible to, relief from the requirement is allowed in our code, and I haven't seen the study, it may be in the staff report, but I imagine the deep subsidy takes away all the, or substantially all of the developers' profit from the project because it's such a deep subsidy if we did actually require that, and that could lead to exposure to the city for takings or but some other potential theory against the city, and the code does allow for flexibility to get relief from the requirement, and that's the reason it's there. And this is actually one of the circumstances I think that was envisioned when we added the exceptions. Really a huge difference in the price between the below moderate or low or moderate housing and the market rate housing. That's the reason we foresaw that there could be a big disparity. And I do know that there are, to address your second question, I do know there are other plans. The city has accumulated funds from in lieu fees from other projects and through redevelopment funds that went into our housing fund because the city does now have a housing agency. So that there are plans to utilize the funds. They're not just going to sit in the bank, but it does take time. And with the end of redevelopment, it takes longer to generate the funds to have a project. It requires a great deal of work from staff. So, but there are plans in the work to expend the housing funds.
Am I correct in my understanding that the affordable housing that we're talking about is supposed to be within the same block or couple of blocks of market rate housing? Is there some kind of ordinance that we have that stipulates that they're the same, close to the same geographic area, serving like the same transit station, that kind of thing? Or is that just, I don't know where I heard that, but I thought that there was some.
Well, Al could correct me, or Lisa, but the ordinance, if the unit is going to be built as part of the project, it needs to be in the project and be comparable to the other units. But again, when there's economic infeasibility, as has been shown to staff and satisfied staff, the funds going into the in lieu fee, that rule doesn't apply anymore. It's a project that would be in the city of San Carlos.
Okay. Because I share Commissioner Pedersen's concern about creating, if we don't have the housing in the housing, we're creating different types of housing, and it's not. I don't want, like I think you mentioned, we don't want to create a ghetto within San Carlos. We want things to be integrated.
So, right. Another project where the housing units are being built is the Transit Village. The units are going to be incorporated into that project. That project is going to have 5% low and 5% moderate. But they also asked for relief.
Yeah, I remember.
The code required 15%, and the relief granted in that case was to lower it to 10%.
Thank you.
One more question, Greg. Aren't those the developments, don't they need to be spread out throughout the community rather than located in one area? So if you have multiple developments.
Multiple BMR developments, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think there's a requirement, but they could be. The housing funds could, for example, subsidize a project that has some market rate and some low income that would be locked in through CC&Rs, for example, or a development agreement. But that until we have a project or request for those funds, it's not required.
I thought when those were set up that the units needed to be spread out throughout the community. So not necessarily you can build projects, but you can't build all the projects in one area.
I don't. I mean, we could look into that for you. It's probably not.
So what you're saying is that we could create a below market rate area.
Well, I think it's project driven, but we could get back to you on that requirement. I mean, it's not really pertinent to tonight's item necessarily, but I think we definitely could give you a primer on how that works as part of the presentation. you've
And
asked
then
for.
Commissioner Marsters, I would like to add, there is some discussion in our housing element about avoiding overly concentrated areas where it's 100% affordable projects. We don't really have anything like that in the city, but there is language. It's not codified per se in zoning, but there is policy language and discussion within the context of housing element. That would be something that we should avoid, and it's discussed.
And I thought that was something at the state level, that the units or the concentrate, you couldn't concentrate these below market units all in one area, that you had to spread them out. And I think I remember that from when we set up the housing element.
Well, we can come back and confirm.
Okay.
But I do know specifically that what Greg Rubens was talking about was within a particular project, the units have to be comparable and kind of spread throughout the single development.
Yeah, the units themselves have to be comparable. Yeah, I remember that. We've had that come before us before.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to talk on this? Mr. Black?
Bob Black. A million years ago, I took a course in urban planning conducted by the current director of planning of the city of San Mateo, Mr. Ott. And he emphasized the importance of mixed housing, where you have a combination of different housing within a community, that it develops a much better type of community. Now, that's all I remember from the course, but I think it really sunk into me that you don't want a uniform mass of people. You want a combination of different types of people, of a mixed community, in other words. And I think we ought to think about that really carefully before we use this in lieu fees as an excuse for financial infeasibility. I think that that's just a cop-out. And I would like you to think very carefully about that. That's number one. Number two is this project is out of character to the community. The lots are much smaller, the houses are much larger than in the community at large, up and down Dartmouth, and up and down Club. I think that we ought to consider seriously the density of that project and the size of the houses and the small lots they'll be on. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good evening, Planning Commissioners, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. My name is Stuart Welty. I'm project architect at EID Architects, and Mark Womack is project architect in our office as well. And Tom Norton, our landscape architect, is here, as well as a couple of members of the development team. So we are here to answer any questions, any further questions you may have. And you've brought up so many great points. By the way, there was something that I wasn't sure it was the right timing for me to speak up, but there was the question about the 50-foot tall tree that might be appropriate for San Carlos. And all over San Carlos, our office used to be in San Carlos for many years. And there's a long history of very beautiful 50-foot tall southern magnolia trees throughout San Carlos. And a personal favorite of mine, and maybe, I think, a perfect fit. They're evergreen, and they're beautiful and fragrant, and it's a perfect fit since there's a precedent in San Carlos for that. The other great thing about San Carlos is that it has a great precedent in its diversity. Unlike a lot of Bay Area cities, San Carlos has a natural tendency to have an integrated, diverse community. There aren't as many of these wonderful communities as you may think in the Bay Area, and San Carlos is an exemplary example of such a great community. When it comes to new development and setting aside of affordable housing, there are the state laws and there's the local laws, as I'm sure you'll get into in much more detail going forward. And we've adhered to them in every community you can think of through California. And I think you have very good guidance in terms of your team and how to set that up appropriately. One of the ways that we have found that it works really well is to utilize the in lieu fee component, because then you have flexibility on how to use those funds. And especially when you have such significant other improvements you could make, like the Four Corners project, which everyone has spoken of since we've been presenting the project to the community over the last many months. We've had 3 community meetings, and we've reduced the project in scope, in size, in number of lots, in number of units, et cetera, through that process by listening to the community and listening to their concerns. And one of the biggest concerns I have is the Four Corners and the traffic, et cetera. So, it's not, I don't think, unusual for those funds to be potentially utilized to help solve that component in one of the very many and very creative solutions that was presented earlier here tonight. Let's see, we held the meetings with the community on July 14th, July 28th, and August 11th. And we made the following changes to the project through that process. We reduced the scope of the project from 13 to 11 units. We increased the lot sizes to be more appropriately sized homes and lot sizes to the existing community fabric in that area. We added additional guest parking spaces. There was a lot of questions about how the parking would be used in the garages, et cetera, and we have a lot of parking in front of the garages as well as on street. And then we have, really nicely sized garages themselves. We have secured agreement with the neighboring church to provide some additional parking even for neighbors who are adjacent to the church. And that's with discussions not only with local residents, but also with the members of the church next door. We've reduced the vehicular entrances into the site and into the new community to eliminate traffic circulation from school drop-offs, which tends to be one of the big issues that sort of causes some chaos in the mornings. We have an EVA and just one single entrance into the site, which, as was mentioned, would be private and completely the cost of which would be upheld by the new residents of the community. We designed the community to prevent pedestrian traffic across the private property at school drop-off and pickup time, which is another one of the issues that tends to happen. People basically cut through the property and park haphazardly, et cetera. So that would be alleviated. We completed a complete shading study. The program software that we use these days is pretty sophisticated, and we showed through those studies that there's really no impact to any of the existing neighbors in regard to shadows. And we reviewed the grading plan to preserve the views for the neighboring homes wherever they occur currently. Excuse me. I have a little bit of a cold. We've reviewed tree planting plan for location and species to preserve the views for the neighboring homes. And there are some nice views there. We've increased the width of the sidewalk and also the bus stop on San Carlos Avenue to accommodate pedestrian traffic, because pedestrian traffic, as was mentioned, including bike lanes, is something that is not really well thought out in that area right now, and we're offering suggestions on how to improve that. we have, so as a result of all these meetings, we've made a lot of changes. Additionally, we've improved the common area park within the site for community gatherings, et cetera. And we've added picnic tables, barbecue areas, seating walls for the community gatherings, outdoor spaces at each home as well for outdoor gatherings, added decks at each home so owners would have plenty of private as well as public open space and views, added trees along the western perimeter, and we're willing to provide, the developers, the owners are willing to provide each homeowner with a 1-year Samtrans bus pass to encourage the use of transit systems and as well as adjacent bus system and Caltrans. So these are all things that we've done in the past where they've worked well. It's a lot, like you say, about integration. It's about variety, and it's about providing the housing to start with, so that you can start to create that community, and then use the additional funds in the right places in conjunction with the properly used, developed other programs to improve the surrounding programs like the Four Corners traffic, et cetera. So thank you very much for your time. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask Mark or myself or anyone else who is here involved in the project.
I have some questions. So I know there was a traffic study done or parking of this, and if I'm understanding what I read correctly, there would be an increase. There would be an increase of traffic. That's undeniable during the peak hours. And I think you mentioned that you're willing to provide some kind of incentive for a certain amount of time for bus passes for the residents to see if we can make that less of an impact as possible, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The other thing is people will be turning left or right, left to come down to San Carlos Avenue. They'll turn left onto Club and come down. Is the entrance going to be above where that pickup drop-off is, or is it going to be below where the students currently do the pickup and drop off?
You mean that existing sort of dirt
that dirt,
U-turn?
I mean, 'cause that's where they do a lot of transfer, pickup and drop off. Is
approximately the same location, just below it.
Just below it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this question isn't for you, but this is in response to, I can't remember the woman that came up, but regarding the construction parking during the project. I think we can probably talk about that. And the other thing I wanted to discuss is she brought up, and this is something we wanted, the residential parking program. I don't know if that's a view that is espoused by the community, but maybe that's something that they should bring up somehow, and I'm not quite sure how they would do that, but I would think that would be helpful. And I think what you put together as far as a project is very tasteful and will create its own community, but the impact to the other community and the other people on Cranfield, we have to make sure that we're addressing that as well, because we don't want to make it a hardship on them for this new community to exist. And I think that's what we'll end up discussing more. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
While you're up, and this might be more appropriate for the landscape architect, but I'm wondering if you can walk me through the picture that's on the screen. Is that of each individual unit's outdoor space? Is that what I'm looking at?
In the back there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one iteration, and then if we can scroll back to the overall set plan. There's a clicker. Is this the? So you can see in each individual residence has their own open space, which is further seen in the enlargement.
Okay, so those little squares I'm looking at are essentially their little decks?
That's an outdoor patio.
Okay.
And the gray squares are furniture.
Because I think one of the concerns, and I know one of the residents, Mr. Black, had brought up that, and this is true of all new developments, a tendency towards larger houses on smaller lots, which of course fits our code, and that's absolutely fine, but making sure that each resident has some access to their own outdoor space, I think, is really important, and it looks like it does. And can you point out on this where the communal space is? Is that the middle space I'm looking at right there?
Yeah, if we go to the other one, that's the, so when you enter in the space off
Okay, so that's kind of the communal
Right, and
gathering
then go back to the-
space.
so this is
So
the
that
enlargement.
is, okay. Okay. I think in my mind, I thought that was a house, each house's kind of landscaping plan, and it's not. Okay. Since you're up here, Scott, do you have tree questions?
I do.
All right.
Shocking.
But I've got a few. Oh yeah, let's just start with trees. So essentially, I looked at your preliminary plant list, and it really didn't tell me what size.
Yeah,
plants?
in discussion with the developer, all the the tree sizes were 48 to 60-inch box trees in an effort to give a more mature feel.
So they're 48 to
Minimum 48 up to 60.
inch box trees. So you're starting off with big trees. Okay. And then, because it looked to me like there was only, in one thing here, you had a 1-gallon plant, but there was nothing else that talked about the size of any of the plants.
Right, and those will be, in the shrubs, that would be a variety from anywhere from flats to 15-gallon, running the gamut, depending on the specific plant material, and then the trees would obviously be the larger.
Okay, and how tall do you expect these trees to get? I noticed you mentioned before about making sure that the trees don't impact with the shading or views of any of the neighboring houses. So are these big box trees, but still going to be small?
Well, the trees reach a mature height, and depending on the environment, they vary, but anywhere from 20 to 50 feet being the max.
Okay. I'm happy with the trees.
He never says that.
Yeah.
That's highly unusual.
Walk away now.
Yeah. That's where you drop the microphone and walk away. Good job.
I do have some other questions, though, but if you, not about landscaping, but about the project itself. So.
Go for it.
Okay. Bus stop. Is there an existing bus stop there?
Oh, yeah.
There is.
And you're going to replace the bus stop, but it didn't look to me like there's any place for the bus to stop without blocking traffic.
That's part of the street design. We do have the ability to improve the bus stop. One of the comments that we received during our community meetings is that we ought to try our best to increase the area at which students can gather and wait for the bus. But in terms of the right-of-way and the design of that street, particularly as it pertains to the overall larger plan of the Four Corners study, we were not asked, nor did we think we had in our ability to really modify that, as it really involves redesigning the entire intersection.
Okay, so what is the distance from the street to the property line?
Actually, there's a fair amount of public land in between that, though that's currently where the bus stop is located.
Wouldn't it make sense to modify it now as part of the project so that the bus stop and the sidewalk are moved back, even if instead of creating that slope up, you actually had to have a retaining wall of some sort, move the bus stop back towards the project and allow enough room along the side of the road there for, 8 feet? For a bus to actually pull over and allow traffic, since traffic is such a big issue in this area, and that bus is going to stop and it's going to block traffic the whole time. Doesn't it make sense to at least consider that at this point?
It was going to be a condition of approval through our discussions because we have to work.
Can you come up to the microphone, please?
Part of our discussion was, as it is a municipal right-of-way, that it would be a condition of approval that as we work through the process of the project, that we would work with the city to redesign that corner, because it's not our right-of-way, but we're happy to help. We want to redesign it. We just, it's
And,
not a
and you're
right
going
of
to put
way.
a new sidewalk and everything in there, right? So I guess I'm going to ask staff.
I was going to say, is this a better question for staff or for
Yeah,
Jay?
it's for
or-
staff,
Is
yeah.
that something we
Exactly.
could do?
Oh, sure.
Well, I think I may defer to our Public Works Director, but staff just didn't see the nexus between this project and that significant of an improvement there, modifying the bus stop. It would be a significant change in the right-of-way, like you indicated, a new retaining wall. That's also a signalized intersection, so moving, realigning that to have a pullout may impact that signalized intersection. So what we asked them to do is take a look at, where the pedestrians currently wait for the bus, because I see how they interact right now, and to see if they could have a more accommodating area for people to wait for the bus and to have a nice area for people to wait. So I don't know if you want to add to the significant modification that would be necessary.
I mean, is there an opportunity here, I think is what Scott's trying
Yes,
to get
but I
at.
mean-
Right.
It sounds like there is an opportunity and that
The city owns property there. It's a wider section of city right-of-way than is currently being utilized by the street. One of the problems, though, with the bus as it comes through that corridor, Samtrans in particular doesn't like to pull off to stop because they have a much more difficult time getting back into traffic.
Okay.
So that's one of the problems with creating a bus stop that pulls way off to the side. We have a fair amount of vehicles that turn right at that corner as they come up to that point too. So creating what would almost look like a right turn lane is probably not in the best interest of that particular location. So buses come through at they obviously got their routes and they run at particular times. So the buses, as they come through the corridor, they have to stop and then they make their way on as they go through. So it's a fairly short amount of time that they're significantly delaying traffic when they're in there. Traffic's going slow anyway. So we just, at this point in time, I think it would be more than what should be required of the project to really set that back with a wall and a lot more infrastructure improvement.
Is that something that could be considered under the Four Corners? Are you so far along that that's not feasible? Or I don't want to not include it in here and then find that 5 years down the road we're kicking ourselves because we didn't take an opportunity. If there is enough potential land there to think about it. So and I'm going to ask you a question. The design that they're putting forth doesn't preclude us 5 years from down the road from putting in a design that would include a bus stop, would it?
As I understand it, there's nothing going into what is the city's property that we wouldn't be able to use later if we needed to use it.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Thank you.
So in answer to your question, it would not preclude something later.
Okay, thank you.
Is that intersection there there's crossing guards there now. Is that part of the Four Corners project as well to continue that? I mean, I made a wrong turn, I guess, when I wasn't supposed to. I'm coming through there just the other day, and I got a had a crossing guard that got a little bit angry at me, and I'm trying to figure out what I did wrong. So I just wondered if that was part of the go forward plan, and where does the funds for those parking guards come from?
So that's actually separate.
The crossing guard, excuse me.
That's right. So that intersection is currently one of the 3 locations within the city that the city and the school district share the cost of. So that's a program that, as long as the council and the school district continue it, it will go forward independent of the Four Corners project.
Okay, thank you.
You had mentioned to one of the architects, you'd mentioned the agreement with the church, the parking agreement with the church. What is that parking agreement? If you would, you kind of glanced over it a little bit, but I know that's a question that was brought up.
Give you a little bit of the backstory on the parking there. There is an existing parking area in that area that's denoted as the open space, which we are going to preserve as church parking, even though it's on the parcel that this the idea that emerged through the conversations that we had with the public during this community meetings was that we ought to try and make sure that some of this parking was available during times when the church was not having services for the neighborhood to utilize some of this parking. Particularly since there's so much random parking occurring all over the property right now. We talked with the owners of the church and with the neighbors and came up with this idea that that area could be used through some sort of an agreement between these property owners, which would include now the property owners essentially all the way around the perimeter of the property, so that there would be specifically areas off-street, not on San Carlos Avenue, where visitors to friends' homes could park.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Would, and I know this might be more appropriate during our discussion, but would the developer have any objection to limiting construction hours before 8 and on weekends? That we have been doing that for many other projects. So, and since a neighbor also brought up that concern.
Yeah, they shouldn't be doing anything before 8 anyways.
Right, but also not weekends, which is allowed.
I've got a set of ideas here.
Okay.
So grading Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Dirt hauling, 9 to 4, Monday through Friday, because you want to get past the
School
school
time,
hours. And then construction could be from 8 to 6, Monday through Friday, and 10 to 5 on Saturday, but no Sunday or holiday construction.
We got, have we addressed construction parking? Do you have something for?
And I got another one for the construction parking too.
Where are you guys planning on staging your construction parking?
Partially on site, and we also would be submitting a construction parking plan to the city for approval. And some of that may include where people are parked distance away and shelled up. We're currently doing a project on
Can you please come up to the microphone?
As far as construction parking, we're doing a project in the Redwood City downtown plan right now where they have very rigid criteria. And so we created a construction parking plan for a specific area, and part of it would be on site for a good percentage of the time. We would create areas, temporary parking on site, and then if there was off-site parking, we'd also restrict anybody from parking in the church parking lot or on Cranfield. And you know, that would actually be in the agreements for the subcontractors. So, and I understand her concern, and there's ways for us to enforce that.
I think what we've done in the past is we've essentially said, if you can't park on site, then you need to park somewhere else and have a shuttle to the site so that you don't impact any of the construction, any of the houses, or the school parking or anything like that around the construction site.
Yeah, and we typically have created, in projects like this, temporary parking on site and with a staged construction aspect. And so we've been able to, you know, the site's big enough, we believe, accommodate it. And in our plan, if we can accommodate the on-site parking, then we'll have some type of shuttle or dedicated space off-site.
What's also unique about your project is you have that common area with the church that you could potentially use as construction parking, provided it doesn't impact Cranfield.
Yeah, and to answer one other question about community parking on the church parking, our agreement was for 8 specific addresses, and we talked to the church about creating a permit for those addresses, and they would have restricted permit parking. And that was, it wasn't just, you know, general parking for neighbors. And I know there's a concern, and I heard Cicely's concern that, and currently there's just random parking on the house property and people coming and going, and I understand the impact on Cranfield from that. Yeah. I've seen it. So hopefully, you know, if there's a permit and some level of enforceability down the road, it would restrict that. It will reduce the amount of that thorough traffic, though, because a lot of the people, the whole house parking lot is full of students and parents picking up children on a weekday right now.
Thank you.
I just have one comment to staff, and I know that just to address Cecily's, what I think final concern, because I think we've addressed most of it in the conversation, but please correct me if I haven't. How would their block, Cranfield Avenue, go about getting a residential-only parking permit program? Because I know those can be very successful.
The city is implementing programs in other areas of town right now, so we have the infrastructure to do a program. It does require city council action to do that. So Ms. Harris could ask the council to do that for her neighborhood, and then the council would be able to consider that.
And from what I understand, the neighborhood itself would also have to vote and agree in the majority, correct?
I believe there's a 50% requirement.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
And I have one other question for staff. Under the conditional use permit, number 7, I was trying to understand, it says the developer shall be responsible for maintenance on all the on-site landscaping within the project and shall enter into a landscaping maintenance agreement with the city to ensure that the maintenance of the on-site landscaping within the project. That just didn't quite make sense to me. Are we talking about also asking them to maintain the landscaping that's in the public right-of-way along San Carlos Avenue also?
So that second one should be outside.
That's what I was thought.
Got it.
Excellent.
We didn't close public hearing, so I just want to leave it open to anybody else want to say anything about this particular item? Yeah or no? Sure. Don't worry about it. We're all new at this, actually.
When they say that the community is notified, I think the mailers only go out to 100 yards from the project site.
300 feet.
That's not really.
300.
That's not really the
300
community.
feet.
And as far as the meetings, I think there was 3 one-hour meetings. 3 one-hour meetings. That's not community.
Okay. Thank you. Sure.
Is this a condominium project?
No.
It's an HOA, but they're not condos, they're single-family units. So they have
Single-family units, but
Single-family
it's
units,
under homeowners association.
Yeah.
Okay, and we haven't heard, have we heard how that is to be organized?
Well, there are, I mean, the state has some pretty strict laws how those are organized.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Going once.
Yes, Davis Sterling is the act that governs homeowners associations. If you want to look at the Davis Sterling, yeah, it goes over that.
Okay. Anyone else? Can I get a motion?
I move that we close public comment on this item.
Second.
Can I get a roll call? Vote.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen?
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters?
Yes.
Commissioner Silverman is absent. Vice Chair Bergman?
Yes.
Chair Gutierrez?
Yes. Okay.
Just a final comment. I just wanted to mention, since it was design review, that I know this design's a little bit more modern, but I think it blends nicely, and I like it. I know it's not everybody else's cup of tea necessarily, but I like it, and I really liked. Thank you very much for bringing the design materials, because that helps much. The materials look much better on the board than in the rendering, so thank you. And then just another comment. I know I've made it before about noticing requirements and their distance from their projects, so I'll say it again. I think we need to look at that and expand those noticing
I
requirements.
agree. I think we've
And
been
that's-
talking about it. We just
that's it.
somehow need to expand that. And you're just happy that it's not a Craftsman, so.
I am indeed. Not
So,
gonna lie.
one more question of staff. Is there any requirement for a TDM for this project?
Though they did give the.
I understand that they're giving the passes and everything, but I just wanted to ask that question to make sure
That's it, right.
if this project triggers that or not.
No, it's not required.
Okay, just wanted to ask.
You looking at us to make.
Okay. But before I do the motion, so the two things that I've got right now are creating hours for grading, dirt hauling, and construction, and coming up with a plan for parking for construction vehicles. Is there anything additional that we need to add in that I've missed?
I don't think so.
To add the condition
Yes.
relating to the garage parking.
Yes.
Oh, that's not in there.
Brought up the idea that if we have a two-car garage, yet an owner may not have any cars or a motorcycle or one car, can they then use the additional space for other things? Because it's happening more and more where people have less cars.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, I have a hard time enforcing people not, it'd be impossible to enforce people to not use that space for storage. I don't know, maybe people have experience with
Lisa, why don't you?
That's why I asked.
Just, I mean, the enforcement typically comes up when that extra car is parked somewhere else and it's annoying another homeowner. And so that's where the complaint is typically generated. If you've got one homeowner behaving nicely with their one vehicle and it's not disturbing anyone, you're not typically going to receive a complaint. Right. But it's much easier to enforce across the board where you require two-car parking for the residents, then they must provide two-car parking spaces. That's enforcing our basic code.
Am I reading the plans right? There's really not enough space in front of the driveways to park in the driveway, is there? They seem.
There's space in the driveway.
They
There
seem
is,
like very
yes.
small driveways, but
Yeah,
I think
you could
maybe
fit two cars in the driveway. There's also space within the garage for some storage, and they're looking at putting some cabinets in as well. There's also basement space where there could be some storage as well.
Right,
So there is storage within the home.
Thank you.
Okay. I just want to get commission approval on the hours. Grading, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
Dirt hauling, Monday through Friday, 9 to 4.
Yeah.
Construction, 8 to 6, Monday through Friday, 10 to 5 on Saturday, and no Sundays or holidays unless the work is inside. So once there's construction, once the building is enclosed, so interior work.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I'm trying to give them some flexibility once they get the inside, once they get the outside walls up and everything. Okay, and so the plan for the construction vehicles, is everybody okay with them coming forward with a plan that's acceptable by staff?
Yes.
Okay, and then the last thing is the garage parking, a requirement that the two cars be, that the garage be used for two cars.
I have to admit, if the driveways can hold two cars, that seems a little harsh to me, but if I'm the only one, I mean, if they're parking on their driveway and not on the streets, I don't.
I thought it was because there was no parking in the driveway.
That's
but
what I thought too.
If you can at least park one car in the driveway, you can park two cars in every single driveway. It does seem a little harsh to me that.
I mean, I feel like if the HOA wanted to do that on their own, that'd be one thing, but for us to do that?
Why we would be putting a condition and why this wouldn't be an HOA choice.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I mean, the code does require that you provide two covered spaces. And in addition, it was really in response to community concerns about parking.
Okay. But
Thank you.
we wouldn't do that for any other single-family home.
Well, this is a development.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, the code says covered parking, right? So it has to be, that has to be available, but I mean,
But
that doesn't mean people have to
to-
actually park in there. I mean, if they could park in their driveway.
Yeah.
I kind of feel you, Scott. We wouldn't necessarily do it. I mean, we have to provide it for every single family home, of course. We just don't have to use it.
Right. Attorney, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'm being,
let's hear from the
I don't know.
You know, I don't have
Smallish
the, I
garage,
don't have
so
the
maybe
full
I'm
text of
biased.
the code in front of me, but I think that is a uniform requirement in town that homes have 2 covered parking spaces. This is not really a different requirement. There's a little technical enforcement issue that probably makes it a little easier to and clearer for the homeowners that, hey, you're not supposed to do that. It might even prompt the HOA to make sure they have their own rule or regulation that they apply. So, and I think, again, it was the response from the community that staff came up with that condition, so. Now, granted, I don't think uniformly the homeowners in town are using both parking spaces that they have covered in there, but it is by complaint. If we don't get a complaint, the city's not actively enforcing these.
Okay.
So, wait, Greg, so just to be clear, if one of my neighbors wasn't using their garage to park their car, I could actually call code enforcement on them? Seriously?
Hypothetically, yes, you could, but I think we would, I mean, the basis for it is fire code and our municipal code. I mean, so, I mean, we have done enforcements for people who have their garage stacked literally with boxes and newspapers and stuff that is a fire hazard. That's the only one I can remember enforcing it because it wasn't really related to parking. It was related to fire safety. I think my policy and staff's policy is try and work with residents who might be contributing to a neighborhood parking problem. You know, I mean, we do have people who temporarily have more cars than they have room for because they have college students home or high school students. And so, you know, there has to be some community flexibility for those types of situations, but as a technical reading of the code, you need to have 2 places available, covered spaces available. Unless you have a 1-car garage, then you need to have 1 covered space available.
Okay.
So having it available, I mean, that's just part of the code and that's part of the design. So do we need to do anything more to, other than have it be part of the design? I mean, well, I guess I'm not clear on what's being.
Add an extra condition if it's already in the code?
Yeah. I'm sorry, could you please try one more time from?
It's really to your discretion,
Yeah.
but I'm really responding to some strong comments that were made at the community meetings that I attended. The developer has revised the plan to add additional guest parking spaces, but that's really the basis for adding this condition, that the community was concerned, you know, you can't park on the street in front of the house where people typically do, and so that's why we add that. But it's really your discretion. If you don't feel it's necessary, that's up to you.
I feel it's necessary. And last time I checked, we can't rewrite code on the spot.
Fine.
So can we add that in, Scott?
I will. I move that the Planning Commission grant approval of the request for conditional use permit, design review, tentative map, grading and dirt haul, and below market rate housing plan at 2811 San Carlos Avenue with the addition of the following conditions. 1, that the hours for grading be reduced to Monday to Friday, 8 to 5 p.m. The dirt hauling hours be reduced to 9 to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. The construction hours be 8 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, 10 to 5 p.m. on Saturday. No Sundays or holidays allowed unless it's interior work. And the second condition is that the developer come up with a plan for parking of construction vehicles, either on-site or off-site in a way that does not impact the surrounding residential or school parking. And number 3, that each of the houses is required to use both the spots in the garage for vehicle parking.
As per code.
As per code.
I'll second that.
Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Harper Pedersen.
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters.
Yes.
Commissioner Silverman is absent. Vice Chair Bergman.
Yes.
And Chair Gutierrez.
Yes. Thank you. Everyone, moving along to reports, correspondence, and general information. Report on recent city council actions.
No news for city council actions.
I thought they upheld the appeal.
There was an appeal, right?
Absolutely. Actually, I had that in a different spot, but you are correct. On January 11th, just last Monday, the council upheld the Planning Commission's decision to approve the new mixed-use building, 9-unit mixed-use building at 545 Walnut.
In addition to that, Mr. Chairman, the council approved a 120-day extension of an urgency ordinance for chain stores in the downtown. And so staff is working with various stakeholders in the community to gather feedback on that. And we will be bringing this forward to the Planning Commission most likely sometime in February or early March for as an ordinance that you will consider and make a recommendation to the City Council.
Great, thank you.
One last bit of communication. Hopefully this is the right place to talk about it. One of the things that the commission brought up a few months ago in consideration of a mixed-use development on Walnut Street, and there's the issues with regard to height as buildings abut the single-family residential neighborhood on Laurel. There's Walnut right behind to the west. And so the commission expressed concern with regard to the height of buildings and things like that and views. And so the city staff has been looking at that internally, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to bring something forward for your consideration with regard to the height on that side of Laurel Street. So that'll be coming up in the next few months as well.
Thank you. Planning Commission comments or reports? Any? None from me.
So I heard 3 things tonight that I think are things that we'd like to hear about in the future. One is that it's potentially time to update the in lieu fee schedule and see, because in the last 5 years, there's been a tremendous increase in the property values in the city, and so it may be time to update those in lieu fees. The second was brought up again about expanding the noticing requirements to a larger area. And then the third was sort of the prohibit the Carlmont parking on Cranfield, parking and drop off on Cranfield, and how that can be solved potentially through permit parking or some sort of signage or enforcement. And so I just want to make sure that all 3 of those things got captured by staff. Okay.
I think we also discussed presentation or update on how the affordable housing and how the city plans to handle those in lieu fees.
As well as the formula. I think it's pretty much just a presentation on that in its entirety, I guess.
Yeah, certainly staff can bring back a discussion on affordable housing in lieu fees, how that's calculated, just kind of an overview and background on our existing ordinance and how fees are collected, what projects trigger them, et cetera.
And one thing that I'm not sure that this current developer understood is that the in lieu fees have to go for housing. It was almost as if he was suggesting that those in lieu fees could be used for something else, but those in lieu fees are required to be used for below market rate housing.
That is correct.
Correspondence, there is, I don't have, then planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects.
Our next hearing date is February 1st, and on the agenda will be another infill mixed-use project located at 520 El Camino Real. That's the vacant, kind of fenced-off property that you see right next to the Shell gas station on the corner of Holly and El Camino Real.
I will be recusing myself from that one since 530 El Camino is the one that we just got a recommendation from on. So I won't be at that meeting unless there's other things on that meeting that I'll be able to be at. So, and then anything else, Lisa?
No.
Okay,
That's
great.
it.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.